Nestled deep within a valley, surrounded by towering mountains and dense forests, lay a quiet village untouched by the chaos of the outside world. The villagers lived a simple yet fulfilling life, their days marked by hard work and a deep connection to nature. They tilled their fields, tended to their livestock, and relied on the land for survival. Generations had lived here, passing down knowledge of the seasons, the animals, and the dangers lurking in the forest that bordered their home. Though wild creatures roamed beyond the village, there was an unspoken understanding. Humans and animals kept to their own spaces. Rarely did a predator dare to step beyond the tree line, for the villagers knew how to protect their own. However, that delicate balance was disrupted one cold autumn night. As the golden hues of the evening sky gave way to darkness, a farmer made his usual rounds, checking on his livestock before turning in for the night. He had done this routine for years, ensuring that his barn doors were secured, his cattle were settled, and his fields were undisturbed. But that night, something felt off. A strange sense of unease settled in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite place. As he neared the barn, his lantern flickering in the crisp night air, his eyes caught sight of something unusual on the ground. The earth, still soft from recent rain, bore large footprints, far too large for any dog, and distinctly unlike those of a human. The prints were deep, indicating the weight of whatever had passed through. His heartbeat quickened as he crouched down, running his calloused fingers over the indentations in the soil. The shape was unmistakable. A bear had been here. But why? Bears were known to stay within the forest, scavenging for food in the underbrush or hunting smaller prey. A bear approaching human settlements was rare, especially one venturing so close to a barn where livestock were kept. Rising to his feet, the farmer immediately turned his attention to his animals. His cows stood quietly in their enclosure, undisturbed. The chickens were perched safely in their coop, and the horses, though restless, showed no signs of injury. Nothing had been taken, no signs of an attack, and yet the footprints told a different story. A predator had been here, but had done nothing. That was what puzzled him most. If a bear had come looking for food, surely it would have tried to break into the barn, or at least lingered near the fences. But aside from the prints, there was no sign that it had caused any trouble at all. Despite his confusion, the farmer did not take the matter lightly. He knew well enough that wild animals, especially large predators, could not be trusted. Even if no harm had come to his livestock tonight, that did not mean the bear wouldn't return with a different intention. Taking no chances, he reinforced the barn doors, double-checking every lock and latch. He ensured the cow pen was secure, adding an extra wooden plank to the gate just in case. Only then did he head inside, though the unease in his gut did not fade. Lying in bed, he turned the possibilities over in his mind. A bear's appearance near a village was always a cause for concern. He had heard stories from neighboring villages, bears scavenging through food supplies, attacking livestock, even wandering dangerously close to homes. But this one had not behaved like the others. It had left without a trace, save for the footprints. Perhaps it had simply lost its way, or maybe it had been spooked before it could act. He convinced himself that this was a one-time occurrence, that by morning the incident would be nothing more than a fleeting concern. Yet as the hours passed and dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, a lingering doubt remained. Something about the night's events felt incomplete, as though a piece of the puzzle was missing. What had the bear been looking for? And more importantly, would it return? The farmer would soon get his answer, but not in the way he expected. The farmer awoke with a strange sense of anticipation, his mind still restless from the night before. As the morning mist rolled over the valley, he pulled on his boots and stepped outside, determined to inspect the barn once more. The golden light of dawn illuminated the landscape, casting long shadows over the ground. His heart pounded as he approached the spot where he had seen the mysterious footprints the night before. To his shock, the tracks were fresh again. The bear had returned. A chill ran through him. The footprints led in the same direction, toward the cow's enclosure. He rushed to check on the animals, expecting signs of a struggle or a broken fence. Yet once again, nothing was out of place. The cows grazed peacefully, their tails flicking away the occasional fly. The barn doors remained closed, and none of the livestock showed signs of distress. It was as if the bear had come, lingered, and left without a purpose. By now, the farmer knew he couldn't ignore this. A single visit might have been a coincidence, but twice in a row, something was drawing the bear to the barn, and he needed to find out what. He called upon a few of his neighbors, explaining what he had seen. The men gathered around the tracks, whispering among themselves. Some suggested it was a young bear, possibly lost or confused. Others warned that it might be scouting the area before launching an attack. Determined to uncover the truth, the villagers devised a plan. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a small group of them would stake out the barn. Armed with lanterns and rifles, they would wait in silence, watching for the bear's return. As the night deepened, the men took their positions, their breath visible in the cool night air. Hours passed in tense silence. The only sounds were the distant hoots of owls and the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees. Just when they began to wonder if the bear would return, a dark shape emerged from the forest. The sight of the massive creature sent a ripple of fear through the group. The bear was larger than they had expected, its thick fur glistening under the pale moonlight. Yet it did not charge or growl. Instead, it moved cautiously, almost hesitantly, toward the barn. It stopped just outside the enclosure and lowered its head, sniffing the air. Then, to everyone's astonishment, it sat down, not in a predatory stance, but as if it was waiting for something. The villagers exchanged bewildered glances. Bears did not behave this way. If it had been searching for food, it would have tried to break into the barn. If it had been aggressive, it would have challenged them. But this bear, it seemed calm, almost expectant. And then something even stranger happened. From inside the barn, one of the cows lifted its head. It let out a soft, low moo, staring directly at the bear. The two animals locked eyes across the fence, and for a brief moment, it seemed as if they recognized each other. The bear gave a quiet huff, shifting its weight but making no move to attack. It remained there for a while longer before, as suddenly as it had come, it turned and disappeared back into the forest. The villagers were stunned into silence. What had they just witnessed? Was this bear visiting the cow? The old farmer, still staring at the empty space where the bear had been, felt a memory stir deep within him. Something about this wasn't just odd, it was familiar, but the truth had not yet revealed itself. For now, all they could do was wait and watch. Would the bear return again? And if so, why? By morning, the entire village was buzzing with talk of the bear's bizarre behavior. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed it was a sign of bad luck, while others feared the bear was preparing for an attack. Many villagers were convinced that leaving the creature alone would only invite disaster. A bear that visits without attacking is even more dangerous than one that does, one elder muttered. His words carried weight, for he had seen many seasons pass and knew the ways of the wild. The farmer, however, wasn't so sure. He had seen the way the bear and the cow had looked at each other. It had not been the gaze of predator and prey. It had been something else, something deeper, unspoken. Still, he could not deny the risks. The bear was huge, and if it decided to attack, there would be little they could do to stop it. That evening, a group of villagers gathered outside the farmer's barn, determined to put an end to the mystery. "We should scare it away before it causes real harm," one man suggested, gripping a torch in his hand. "Or worse, what if it's rabid? What if it suddenly turns violent?" Another added, shaking his head. But the farmer hesitated. "Let's wait just one more night," he said, his voice firm. "I need to understand why it keeps coming back. If it turns dangerous, I'll be the first to drive it away." Reluctantly, the villagers agreed. That night, more eyes watched the barn than ever before. Hidden behind fences, in the shadows of trees, they waited. The air was thick with tension, the only sounds coming from the rustling leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal birds. And then, as expected, the bear returned. It emerged from the darkness, moving with a deliberate yet gentle stride. It paused near the barn, tilting its head slightly, as if listening for something. Then, just like before, it sat down near the cow's enclosure. But this time there was a difference. The cow, the same one it had been visiting, moved closer to the fence. She let out another soft moo, her large eyes locked onto the bear. It was an eerie, almost surreal sight. Two creatures that should have feared each other, sitting in peaceful silence. The watching villagers were both fascinated and unnerved. This was not normal. This was not natural. "It's waiting for something," one man whispered. "Or someone," another added. A creeping realization settled over the farmer. This bear wasn't just wandering here by chance. It had a reason, a purpose. But what? As the minutes stretched into an hour, the bear finally stood, sniffed the air one last time, and disappeared into the forest. The villagers were left in stunned silence. This was no accident. This was a reunion. And suddenly the farmer remembered something he had nearly forgotten. A memory buried deep in the past began to surface. A moment from years ago. A time when this same barn had once sheltered another lost soul. A time when an orphaned creature had once found warmth inside these very walls. And then it hit him. The bear wasn't just any bear. It was the same cub he had once saved. The truth was finally coming to light. As the realization struck him, the farmer felt an unexpected wave of emotion. Could it really be the same bear? The one he had rescued all those years ago? The thought seemed impossible, yet the bear's behavior told a different story. It had not come to attack or steal food. It had come for the cow. And if his memory served him right, there was only one explanation. Years ago, during a particularly harsh winter, the villagers had found a small, starving cub near the edge of the forest. The mother bear had likely perished, leaving the helpless cub alone. Most villagers had insisted that nature should take its course, that intervening in the wild was dangerous. But the farmer, feeling pity for the weak, shivering creature, had ignored them. He had taken the cub in, sheltering it in the very barn that now seemed to call it back. And the cow, the same cow the bear was visiting, had been its unexpected guardian. The old farmer's breath caught in his throat as memory surfaced. He remembered how the cub had curled up beside the cow, seeking warmth during those freezing nights. The cow had allowed it, even nudging it closer with a protective instinct that had baffled everyone. Over time, the cub had grown stronger, its once frail body filling out with the nourishment and comfort provided by its unlikely companion. Then, when spring arrived, the cub had disappeared into the forest, as if instinct had finally pulled it back to its rightful home. The farmer had often wondered what had become of it. Had it survived? Had it learned the ways of the wild, becoming the powerful beast it was always meant to be? And now, all these years later, the answer was sitting right in front of him. The cub had never forgotten. It had returned, not as a lost and starving orphan, but as a full-grown bear, one that still remembered the warmth and kindness of its childhood. The weight of the realization was overwhelming. The farmer knew the other villagers wouldn't easily accept this truth. To them, a bear was a bear, wild, dangerous, and unpredictable. Telling them that this enormous predator had once lived among them would only stir more fear. They needed proof. Determined, the farmer decided to take a bold step. If the bear returned again, he would record the encounter. He had an old camera, one that hadn't seen use in years, but it would do the job. If he could capture what he had been witnessing night after night, perhaps he could convince the others that the bear meant no harm. That evening, he set up his camera just outside the barn, ensuring that it had a clear view of the enclosure. He tested it once, making sure it was ready to record. Then he stepped back, preparing for what was to come. The villagers were still wary. Many were growing impatient, demanding that the bear be driven away before something terrible happened. But the farmer held firm. He told them to give him one more night. If the bear showed any aggression, they could take action. But if he was right, if the bear truly wasn't a threat, then they would have to reconsider everything they thought they knew about these animals. As the sky darkened and the village fell into hushed anticipation, the now familiar presence emerged from the tree line once more. The bear moved with purpose, its heavy steps careful, calculated. It made its way toward the barn just as it had every night before, stopping at the same spot near the fence. The cow was already waiting. The farmer watched with bated breath as the two creatures locked eyes once more. There was no fear, no hesitation. The bear gave a soft huff, and the cow, in response, let out a deep, gentle moo. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, the bear lowered itself onto the ground beside the fence, resting its massive body as it had done when it was a cub. The farmer's camera caught every second of it. He could barely believe what he was seeing. The bear wasn't visiting out of hunger or curiosity. It was coming back to the only home it had ever known. The barn, the cow, the farmer. They were a part of its past, a past it had never truly left behind. The realization left him breathless. The old cub had not just survived, it had thrived. And yet, despite its return to the wild, despite becoming the powerful beast it was always meant to be, it still longed for something it had lost. That night, the farmer made a decision. He wouldn't let the villagers harm the bear. It had done nothing but seek comfort, a connection to its past. It had never shown aggression, never caused harm. If it wanted to come back, then it should be allowed to. He turned to the small group of villagers gathered around him, their faces etched with both amazement and uncertainty. Then, without saying a word, he replayed the footage, and one by one, as they watched the video of the massive bear curling up near the cow, like it had once done as a cub, their expressions changed. This wasn't a dangerous predator. This was a lost soul returning home. The truth weighed heavily on the farmer's chest. The bear wasn't just a wild creature aimlessly wandering into the village. It was the same orphaned cub he had once saved, the one that had spent its earliest days nestled against the warmth of his cow. And now, despite years of separation, despite having grown into a powerful beast of the wild, it had found its way back. Not because it was hungry, not because it wanted to harm, but because deep within its instincts, within the very fabric of its being, it still remembered the gentle warmth that had once saved its life. As the farmer stood by the barn that evening, staring at the footprints that led away into the dark forest, his thoughts swirled with emotions he hadn't expected: guilt, wonder, an overwhelming sense of connection to this creature that had defied the natural order just to return to a place that once meant home. The realization made him weak at the knees. He had spent years wondering if the cub had survived, hoping it had found its way in the wild. And now he had his answer. The cub had lived, it had grown strong, but it had never forgotten. The villagers, however, did not share his sentiment. To them, the presence of a bear so close to their homes was still a threat. No matter how gentle it appeared, no matter how strangely it behaved, it was still a predator. And predators were dangerous. Word spread quickly through the village, and fear took root. The whispers grew louder. We have to scare it away. If we don't act now, it'll attack. It's only a matter of time before something goes wrong. The farmer tried to reason with them. He explained what he had come to understand, how the bear was not here to hunt, but simply to visit the only family it had ever known. But fear had already clouded their judgment. Some villagers wanted to set traps. Others suggested shooting the bear before it became a problem. The farmer's heart pounded at the thought. He couldn't let that happen. That night he made a decision. If the bear returned, he would prove once and for all that it was not a danger to them. He would stand his ground and show them the truth. The air was thick with tension as the sun dipped below the horizon. The farmer sat near the barn, his camera ready to capture whatever unfolded. The village watched from the safety of their homes, their windows glowing like distant eyes in the dark. The wind carried the distant rustling of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, and then a sound he had come to expect. Soft, deliberate footsteps. The bear had come again. The massive creature stepped into the moonlight, its powerful form moving with unexpected grace. It did not hesitate. It did not skulk in the shadows like a predator on the hunt. It walked straight to the fence, and waiting for it, as always, was the cow. The village held its breath. The farmer remained perfectly still, watching as the bear once again lowered itself to the ground, its dark eyes focused on the cow. Then came the sound that no one expected, a deep, heavy sigh from the bear, almost human in its sorrow. And in response, the cow stepped forward, pressing its head gently against the wooden fence. Time seemed to stop. The bear made no attempt to breach the enclosure. It did not growl. It did not paw at the ground with aggression. It simply sat there, as if waiting for something that would never come. And that's when the farmer saw it. A tear, a glistening streak ran down the bear's thick fur, catching the moonlight for just a moment before disappearing into its coat. It was such a small thing, barely noticeable, yet it struck the farmer harder than anything else. The bear was grieving. The realization was like a weight crushing his chest. The bear hadn't just returned to visit. It had come looking for something it had lost. A mother, a home, a memory of warmth that had once kept it safe. The truth was finally undeniable. The bear wasn't visiting the cow out of habit. It was longing for something it could never have again. Perhaps in its mind, it had expected to find things exactly as they were all those years ago. Maybe it thought that, after all this time, it could still curl up beside the cow as it once had, finding comfort in the familiar scent of hay and the gentle nudge of a motherly presence. But the world had changed. The bear had grown, and the time of innocence had long passed. The bear stayed longer that night than it ever had before. The villagers who had watched with suspicion were now silent. Even the most fearful among them could not deny what they had seen. This was no wild monster. This was something else entirely. A creature that, despite the savage laws of nature, still clung to the only kindness it had ever known. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bear gave one last heavy breath, stood up, and turned toward the forest. But this time it lingered for a moment. It looked back at the cow, at the barn, at the place that had once been home, and then with slow, heavy steps, it disappeared into the trees. The farmer's heart twisted painfully as he watched it go. He knew deep down that this might be the last time, that the bear had finally come to understand what it had likely been trying to deny, that the past could not be relived. For a long time after, no one in the village spoke. The fear that had once driven them had been replaced by something else, something deeper, more profound. The bear had taught them something they never could have expected. It had shown them that even among the fiercest of creatures, love, memory, and loss still existed. The farmer, standing alone by the fence, wiped his eyes. The bear had come looking for a home that no longer existed, and in doing so, it had left behind a story that would never be forgotten. The night the bear walked away for what the farmer suspected might be the last time, the village stood in an unspoken silence. No one dared to break the moment with idle chatter or fearful warnings. Even those who had insisted on chasing the creature away remained still, humbled by what they had witnessed. The bear had not been a threat, nor had it been a predator lurking in the shadows. It had been something far more fragile, a soul yearning for something it had lost. The farmer remained at the fence long after the bear disappeared into the forest. His fingers rested lightly on the old wood, his mind racing with memories. Had the cub ever truly forgotten its past? Or had it spent years searching, drawn by an instinct far stronger than mere survival? He could not know for certain, but one truth settled deep in his chest. The bond between the bear and the cow had never broken, not even after all these years. And perhaps, despite the impossible divide between their worlds, it never would. In the days that followed, the villagers no longer spoke of chasing the bear away. The fear that had once surrounded its presence had faded, replaced instead by something else, a quiet respect. Even the most skeptical among them had seen what had unfolded that night. They had watched as the bear sat beside the cow, not as a hunter, but as something closer to a friend, seeking comfort in the only way it knew how. The farmer continued to watch the barn each evening, waiting to see if the bear would return again. Night after night, he left the gate unlatched just in case. But as the days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months, the bear never came back. At first, he felt an ache in his heart, an emptiness that reminded him of something left unresolved. But in time, he began to understand. The bear had found what it needed, a final moment with the cow, a silent farewell. It had clung to the past for as long as it could, but now perhaps it had finally understood that it had to move forward. Still, the memory of that strange, beautiful friendship remained. Visitors who passed through the village heard the story and marveled at it, struggling to believe that such a bond could exist between a cow and a bear. But the villagers knew the truth. They had seen it with their own eyes, felt its weight in their hearts. And then one evening, months after the bear's last visit, something unexpected happened. The farmer was finishing his evening chores when he noticed the cow standing at the fence, her large, soft eyes gazing out toward the tree line. She had been doing this for days now, standing still, listening. It was as if she too was waiting for something. Then, just as he was about to turn away, a deep, distant sound echoed from the forest. A low, familiar huff. The farmer's breath caught in his throat. He turned sharply toward the sound, his heart hammering. The trees remained still, the shadows untouched. But he had heard it. There was no mistaking it. Somewhere out in the vastness of the wild, the bear had not forgotten. It had moved on, yes, but it had not abandoned the past. Perhaps it had come close, standing hidden in the safety of the trees, watching the barn from afar one last time. Maybe it too had wanted to be sure that everything remained just as it had left it. The farmer swallowed the lump in his throat. He looked toward the cow, who remained by the fence, ears perked toward the sound. And for the first time in months, a small, knowing smile touched the farmer's lips. The bear was gone, but the bond, the memory, the connection, it would always remain. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, life in the village slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The bear never returned to the barn, but its presence remained in the whispers of the wind, in the rustling leaves at the edge of the forest, and in the quiet moments when the farmer found himself looking toward the tree line, half expecting to see a familiar shadow moving between the trees. The cow, too, seemed to sense the absence. She no longer lingered at the fence as often, though some nights she would still stand there, her ears twitching, her body still, as if listening for something only she could hear. Did she remember? The farmer had no doubt that she did. The bond that had formed all those years ago, in the warmth of the barn during a cruel winter, was not something that could be easily forgotten. The story of the bear and the cow spread beyond the village, reaching ears far and wide. Some dismissed it as mere folklore, an exaggeration of events twisted into legend. But those who had witnessed it firsthand knew the truth. It was not a story of a wild predator, nor of a helpless farm animal. It was a story of love, memory, and the unbreakable ties that sometimes form between the most unexpected souls. Visitors came from other villages, eager to hear more. Some stood by the old wooden fence, imagining the sight of the great bear sitting peacefully beside the cow. The farmer, once hesitant to speak of it, found himself telling the story over and over again, not with fear, but with quiet reverence. He spoke of the winter that had nearly stolen the cub's life, of the cow's unwavering patience, and of the nights when the bear had returned, seeking something it had lost but never forgotten. The villagers, who had once been so afraid, began to see things differently. They no longer spoke of the bear as a threat. Instead, they spoke of it with awe and respect, as though it had been more than just a wild animal, as though it had been something closer to a friend. Seasons passed, and with time, the memory of the bear's visits became woven into the fabric of the village's history. Children grew up hearing the tale, their eyes wide with wonder as they imagined a beast of the wild sitting quietly beside a gentle farm animal, bound together by something even the wisest among them could not fully explain. One evening, as the farmer sat on his porch, watching the last rays of sunlight stretch across the fields, he heard the distant cry of a bear echoing through the valley. It was deep, resonant, and unmistakable. He closed his eyes and listened. The bear was still out there, somewhere in the vast expanse of the wild, strong, alive. And in that moment, he understood something that brought a bittersweet smile to his lips. The bear had not returned to the village because it had finally learned what the farmer himself had struggled to accept. Some bonds do not need to exist in the physical world to remain unbroken. Somewhere out there, the bear remembered. And that was enough. If you found this story heartwarming and inspiring, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more incredible tales of nature, survival, and unexpected bonds. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Your support helps us bring you more amazing content. Join our community today.